All right, let's jump right into this explainer. For decades, NATO hasn't just been a military alliance. It's really been this invisible ceiling, right? A ceiling holding back the absolute worst instincts of great power politics. It's one of those massive global structures most of us barely even think about until it begins to crack. So today, we're going to explore exactly what happens when that ceiling fractures. Welcome to this explainer on the collapse of certainty. So the fundamental question we need to tackle right off the bat is this: what if NATO actually breaks apart? And the really crucial thing to understand here is that a collapse of this magnitude, it wouldn't just stay neatly confined to one geographic region. It wouldn't just be a European problem or an American problem. It would create these massive cascading consequences for global trade, for military planning, and literally for the entire international order as we know it. Section 1. The anatomy of a fracture. Let's look at how alliances actually end. You know, massive, powerful alliances don't usually end with some sudden, dramatic explosion. Instead, it's more of a slow-motion collapse driven by quiet hesitation and a gradual, almost imperceptible loss of trust. And we generally see this happen in 4 distinct steps. First, you get tension. Maybe one country starts loudly questioning spending commitments. Then, that turns into debate, where nations start asking if the alliance even serves their core interest anymore. That inevitably leads to delay in joint decisions, and finally, outright disagreement. Over time, statements that used to sound rock solid and united begin sounding entirely conditional. The cohesion just evaporates. Now, the very first major casualty of a fracturing alliance is actually human psychology. There's this incredibly accurate saying: rivals do not need to wait for total collapse. They only need to sense uncertainty. The deterrent effect of NATO weakens long before any official treaty is actually changed or torn up. Once that absolute, ironclad belief that an attack on one means a collective response starts to fade, geopolitical rivals begin adjusting their strategies immediately. Section 2. Europe's new security nightmare. Here is the new security reality. So if that psychological deterrent fades, immediate panic hits Europe the hardest. Think about it. The old assumption of a permanent security umbrella just vanishes. This forces a massive geopolitical transformation into something called strategic autonomy. That basically means building the ability to defend yourself even if the old alliance system can't fully be trusted anymore. European nations would have to scramble. We're talking massive boosts to defense budgets, a heavy reliance on individual national armies, and we might even see the widespread return of conscription debates right across the continent. But make no mistake, the shockwaves hit the United States just as hard, creating a totally explosive political dilemma. You would see a stark divide emerge. On one side, a faction demanding the alliance be preserved at all costs, viewing it as the absolute backbone of Western stability. But on the flip side, another faction demanding an immediate end to what they see as disproportionate burden sharing, arguing that America shouldn't fund a system that others just take for granted. And this deep internal divide, it would only accelerate the structural weakness of the whole alliance. Section 3. The global power vacuum. The opening for rivals. When the central powers behind an alliance start wavering, it naturally creates a void. A breakdown in military coordination, meaning uncertain command, selective intelligence sharing, and drastically slower response times, creates a massive opening. And what's fascinating is that Russia wouldn't necessarily need to launch a direct, overt attack to take advantage of this. Instead, they would likely exploit the division through subtle, multifaceted pressures. We're talking political influence, intense cyber operations, squeezing energy leverage, and highly targeted information campaigns. If NATO is no longer guaranteed to move as one, every single one of these subtle pressures becomes a highly effective tool to destabilize the region even further. Meanwhile, you better believe China would be studying this fragmentation very, very closely to adjust its own long-term strategy. A fracturing NATO signals that the broader Western system is under intense political and psychological pressure. So China would use this opportunity to cautiously gain leverage. They'd be looking to shape new regional arrangements and shift global trade balances, while the West is completely distracted by its own internal divisions. So, how does a power vacuum like this actually escalate? Well, let's put it on a timeline. In month 1, we'd see immediate anxiety at border regions. Air patrols increase, cyber defense instantly goes on high alert. By year 1, there's a frantic search for alternative partnerships as nations fully realize how exposed they are. And by year 5, previously managed areas, like the Arctic corridor, for instance, become extremely dangerous zones of sharper contest, competition, and total uncertainty. Section 4. Markets and human minds. Let's talk about the economic and human shocks. Because look, This isn't just a story about high-level military theory and grand strategy. There is severe economic and psychological fallout that hits everyday citizens right in the wallet. The mere perception of instability causes defense industries to surge. Energy markets, they become incredibly volatile, forcing Europe toward a faster energy independence that's driven entirely by fear rather than comfort or climate goals. Shipping and insurance costs would skyrocket in sensitive regions. And to pay for all this increased national defense, governments would likely be forced to enact painful funding cuts to everyday social programs. And that brings us to the very human, emotional reality of this scenario. Imagine this. A soldier wonders whether help will actually come. A family near a border starts thinking about contingency plans. Alliances don't just live in ink on treaties. They live in the minds of ordinary people who trust them. When that profound trust is shattered, the psychological impact is deeply personal and honestly terrifyingly real. Because of that shattered trust, we would see absolute chaos in public opinion. Citizens and the media would fiercely debate the collapse. Some people would blame politicians. Others would feel this deep nostalgia for the old days of certainty, and some might actually feel relief from what they saw as a rigid, outdated structure. Media platforms would turn into absolute battlegrounds, endlessly arguing over the accumulation of internal disagreements that finally broke the system. Section 5. A new patchwork world. Fragmented security. So, taking a step back, what actually happens to the global order when one of its most visible, foundational pillars of stability just simply falls away? Basically, we'd be trading the clean simplicity of the post-war era, where one grand alliance clearly signaled unity, for a chaotic patchwork. We'd be looking at a highly unpredictable future held together by a fragmented web of overlapping, smaller, and potentially highly unstable bilateral defense pacts. It's like replacing a single steel table with a bunch of tangled strings. In this new patchwork world, there would be an urgent race to redefine what mutual defense even means against modern threats, because security is no longer just about classic military hardware, tanks and planes. Any new arrangement would have to instantly account for cyber attacks, drone swarms, massive disinformation campaigns, economic coercion, and hybrid warfare. It's a whole new ballgame. Ultimately, the end likely wouldn't be a dramatic final explosion. It's more of a tragic fading away through 3 steps of institutional decay. They degrade, they adapt, and they shed confidence. A partial breakup, where NATO survives in name but limps forward utterly stripped of its unity and confidence, might actually be the most realistic and, honestly, the most difficult crisis to manage. It would look perfectly stable from the outside while completely failing from within, like a zombie alliance. Which leaves us with this unforgettable final question. Can the world really remain stable when its biggest pillar cracks? The collapse of certainty isn't just about an alliance ending. It's about what rushes in to fill the void left behind. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this breakdown insightful and want more deep dives into the invisible structures that shape our world, make sure to subscribe. There's always more to uncover. Catch you next time.